I want to take a few minutes here with you to pull together all the things we've been learning about here in Unit 3 about social psychology and talk about the need to belong as an organizing psychological principle that is responsible for many of the various phenomena that we've been talking about throughout the unit. So if you remember, one of the main topics that we talked about was social categorization, a process by which we assign ourselves, other individuals, into social categories and groups. We talked about how we use the term in-groups to describe social categories to which we categorize ourselves, and the term out-groups for social categories to which we do not assign ourselves. So I'd like to talk about how this process, and indeed many of the processes we talked about related to social categorization, are a function of this need to belong. We're going to talk in a minute about what that need to belong is and how it came about. But first, I'd like you to just take a few minutes to briefly write out some answers to the following questions, or at least to reflect on these. Are emotional bonds with others important to you? Why or why not? Think about a close personal relationship in your life. Why is it important to you? How does that emotional bond make you feel? At the core of the concept of the need to belong is the idea that human beings have a drive to form and maintain lasting, positive, and significant interpersonal relationships. There's two main components to this need to belong. Think of this as an orienting drive that pushes much of our behavior. So first, as human beings, we have a need for frequent, emotionally pleasant interactions with at least a few other people. And second, these interactions need to take place in the context of temporally stable and enduring frameworks in which we have concern for the welfare of each other. So we seem to have this need for emotionally pleasant interactions with other people, and these interactions need to be stable and enduring, where there's mutual concern for one another's welfare. This need drives a great deal of human behavior, both our overt behavior, but also our internal world. Think about how much time you spend thinking about other people and your relationships with them, and how much of your behavior involves interactions with other people, involves seeking and maintaining close, long-term relationships with others, whether it's friendships, your relationships with family members, or romantic relationships. Again, it's not just overt behavior, but privately we spend time thinking about them. Many of the great works of art involve expression of emotions related to relationships. This need drives behavior across a range of situations, and it's been present across cultures and times and individuals throughout all of human history. Now, of course, there are individual differences in the strength of this drive to belong, and there are some differences across cultures. But in general, it appears that there's this fundamental influence over human behavior that pulls us together into close-knit groups with long-term, close relationships between individuals. Why is that the case? Why is our behavior linked so closely with the behavior of people around us? This characteristic was naturally selected through evolutionary processes. The desire and tendency to form and maintain social bonds likely has both survival and reproductive benefits, evolutionarily speaking. So as we've talked about quite a bit in class, early humans formed close-knit tribes that enabled them to survive. Human beings who did not have a tendency and desire to form and maintain close, long-term, positive, emotional, social bonds people who lacked that characteristic, who lacked that predisposition, likely struggled to survive and likely struggled to find people to mate with. Maybe they starved to death, maybe they froze to death, maybe they were single throughout their entire life and didn't find anyone to mate with. Therefore, they didn't pass on their genes. But human beings who did form close, long-term relationships that were mutually beneficial to one another tended to survive. They were able to build structures to protect them from the elements. They were able to kill giant woolly mammoths. And they were able to find someone to mate with and to raise children with. Small human groups could cooperate to hunt, to care for offspring, to defend each other from predators. Some humans could go off and find some tasty mushrooms to bring back to the group to have dinner. And thus, people were able to survive to a reproductive age and were able to reproduce and thrive as small groups. So over time, the environment selected for a set of characteristics: a tendency to orient toward other members of our species, a tendency to experience distress if we're deprived of social contact or relationships, a tendency to feel pleasure or positive emotions from social contact, and then a tendency to seek out, form, and maintain bonds with other humans. So our environment selected for this need to belong and this predisposition to seek out and form relationships, because that tendency helped us survive, and humans who didn't have that tendency died. So our physical environment selected for this predisposition, this characteristic. So our tendency to seek out emotional contact and to form friendships and to form romantic relationships and to get together in groups of people was evolutionarily selected for. It's an adaptation. It helped us better navigate our environment as a species, evolutionarily speaking. So right now we're in a really interesting time where we've canceled classes on the university. And as human beings, we are distancing ourselves socially to reduce the transmission of the novel coronavirus. And it's likely that people will experience distress from that social distancing because it goes against our drive as human beings to be together, to spend time together, and to be in close proximity with one another. There's been quite a bit of research about forming and maintaining social bonds. Research strongly supports this evolutionary hypothesis that we have a predisposition and drive to belong. One important research finding that has been replicated hundreds of times is that human beings form bonds quickly and easily. Infants form quick emotional bonds with caregivers long before they can speak or before they can even understand what an emotional bond is. And that benefits the newborn. Mere proximity is a potent factor in relationship formation. We quickly form strong bonds with people just because they're near us. Indeed, research suggests that people seem to form favorable views of whomever they spend time with, even if they previously disliked other people. So for example, in one famous research study, researchers arranged 4 different conditions, each involving a different person, who in this case was a woman, who were of similar appearance to one another. And they attended a college class a certain number of times throughout the semester. So imagine if you were a participant in this study, you'd be sitting in a classroom throughout the entire semester. This was a within subjects design, so each participant, in this case the students in the class, experienced all levels of the independent variable. And the independent variable was the amount of time that each of these 4 women spent in the classroom. So one of the 4 women didn't actually attend class at all. For the other level of the independent variable, the woman attended the class 5 times. The other level of the IV, the woman attended 10 times. And in the last condition, the woman attended all 15 class meetings. These women didn't interact with the students at all. They just sat in the classroom. They said nothing the entire semester. Then at the end of the semester, the students in class saw pictures of each of these women and rated them on several scales, such as likability. Despite never having interacted directly with any of them, students showed what we call the mere exposure effect. They evaluated the woman who they had seen 15 times much more positively than the woman they had never seen at all. They evaluated the woman they'd seen 15 times more positively than the woman they'd only seen 5 times. In other words, bonds form so easily that simply being around people increases the degree to which we view them favorably, increases the bond we form with them. Again, we call this the mere exposure or the mere proximity effect. As an example from my own life, we had someone in our dorm my freshman year who initially we all had this very strong negative reaction to. But over time, simply by being around this individual, we all sort of altered how we viewed him, such that by the end of the year we spent together in our freshman dorms, we evaluated him positively and had a positive attitude toward him, simply by being around him. So not only does research suggest that we form social bonds quickly and easily, but research indicates that the ending of even the most informal of social bonds elicits emotional distress. Why? Well, if you were an early human being and somehow your relationship with your tribe was fractured, or you got separated from the tribe, or maybe even if there was some disruption of that bond, evolutionarily speaking, it would be adaptive to feel distress when that happens so that you immediately try to repair any bonds. And research suggests that we become really upset, even if transitory bonds, such as those formed between classmates, are in some way fractured. So these dual psychological processes maintain this need to belong. And both of these psychological processes are evolutionary adaptations, a tendency to want to form bonds with other people and to form them quickly and easily, and a tendency to feel really distressed when emotional bonds are threatened. Both of those predispositions, both of those tendencies were selected for by the environment and are evolutionary adaptations. And both of those predispositions, then, are responsible for many of the phenomena that we've been talking about this unit. Our tendency to conform, the fact that our attitudes are influenced by other people. These are essentially side effects of this evolutionary process. Indeed, research suggests that emotional bonds are deeply important to us, again, because of these predispositions. We spend time thinking about bonds. And in turn, our social bonds influence how we think. We develop in and out group biases, for example, as we've talked about. The formation of social bonds is associated with positive emotions, falling in love perhaps being the most notable. But more generally, the formation of new bonds, new friendships, joining clubs or a new Greek organization is celebrated as joyous. We often create ceremonies surrounding the formation and maintenance of those bonds. Intimacy is associated with happiness and feelings of well-being. And the absence of bonds strongly linked to unhappiness, loneliness, sadness, and depression. We feel distressed and lonely when excluded. Even physical health is impacted by whether or not our needs for belonging are fulfilled or not. So we spent some time in class talking about some of the negative impacts of in-group and out-group social categorization. But I want to spend some time highlighting how this need to belong can cultivate positive social behavior as well. In general, we use the term pro-social behavior to describe positive social behavior. Pro-social behavior referring to behavior that benefits others and our society at large. Altruism is a specific type of pro-social behavior that involves helping people with no expectation of reward or even when putting oneself at risk of harm. We can also use evolutionary processes to explain why as human beings, we behave pro-socially and positively toward one another. And primarily there are two evolutionary forces that cultivate pro-social, positive, altruistic behavior. The first of those evolutionary processes is something called kin selection. When we behave pro-socially or altruistically toward our own kin, essentially our own family, people who have genes that are very close to ours, that enhances the survival of those genes that are close to ours. Moreover, groups that have members that behave pro-socially or altruistically tend to survive and perform better than groups that fight with one another inside the group. So at a group level and at a kin level, at a family level, altruistic or pro-social behavior is selected for. Again, in part because groups that behave pro-socially and altruistically tend to perform better than groups that don't. So research suggests, and indeed our evolutionary history suggests, that behaving in pro-social altruistic ways is helpful, it's beneficial, and in the long run, it's good. So essentially, being kind and caring toward one another is adaptive and helpful, and helps groups function better. So just as an example of how pro-social behavior and kindness can matter, in a recent psychology study, participants were randomized to one of two conditions. These were university students. And the students who participated in this study got $5 every day for 5 days. So for days 1 through 5, each day, participants were given $5. And they were required to spend that money on the exact same thing every day. So we have all the participants given $5 a day, and they have to spend that on one thing every day. And the researchers randomly assigned participants to one of two conditions. In one condition, participants each day spent that $5 on themselves, such as buying themselves a coffee every day. In the other condition that participants could be randomly assigned to, they had to spend that $5 on someone else. For example, leaving a tip or making an online donation to the same charity every day. At the end of each day of this 5-day study, participants reported their overall level of happiness. For people who were given $5 to then spend on themselves, there was a moderate reduction in happiness over the course of the 5 days. As you might imagine, you start off like, hey, I get this extra money and get to buy myself something, and that might make you happy. But over time, that effect tends to fade. But for participants who spent the $5 on other people, we did not see that reduction in happiness over time, but rather spending that $5 on others, engaging in pro-social behavior, maintained that boost in happiness throughout the entire 5-day period. So research suggests that not only is pro-social behavior adaptive, but it can increase feelings of happiness and well-being. So that concludes this mini lecture about the need to belong and pro-social helping behavior. If you have any questions, shoot me an email and let me know. And remember, there is an assignment connected with this mini lecture. Answer a few questions on Canvas and submit that assignment.